They had studied human psychology, compiled terabytes of cultural context, held seminars and consultations with Earth-born diplomats. The consensus was that humans were cooperative when respected and lethal when cornered. But above all, they obeyed orders when serving under chain of command. At least, that's what the data implied. That assumption failed the moment Sergeant Alira Voss said, "No." The order was clear, issued from high command during Operation Quell Strike, a remote settlement on Argava. 3 had been flagged as a rebel supply depot. Alira and her joint unit were deployed as part of the peacekeeping force to neutralize resistance. Protocol allowed for a preemptive strike, even if the location held civilians, as long as the risk metric exceeded 62%. The calculation came back at 63.7%. Colonel Tyrok, a methodical Thursian who valued efficiency above all, relayed the coordinates to every squad leader. Voss didn't blink. She read the briefing, looked at the satellite imagery, listened to the background chatter. Children, medical tents, unarmed refugees. A safe zone turned target because the algorithm said so. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't protest. She didn't request clarification. She simply responded with a word that shattered protocol. No, the silence that followed was not awkward. It was surgical, like the breath before a vacuum breach. The other species in the commnet froze. The Squellian tactician asked if her signal was corrupted. The Kethan adjutant suggested emotional overload. Tyrok calmly repeated the order. "No," she said again. "I will not authorize the strike." That's when everything began unraveling. On death worlds, survival required instinct, reflex, and cold judgment. Humans had learned to trust their senses over systems. That wasn't a bug. It was a feature. The other species mistook it for unpredictability. What it actually was, what they were now seeing, was conscience made flesh. She did not offer justification. She wasn't confused. She wasn't rebelling. She was making a decision based on morality, not metrics. Alien doctrine relied on compliance to function. Even disagreement was channeled through proper forms, ranked appeals, and override hierarchies. Saying no without first submitting a counter-execution clause was equivalent to mutiny. Her refusal triggered automated protocols. The tribunal system flagged her name. The recording was time-stamped and encrypted. A red report was filed to the syndicate's behavioral oversight board. She knew all this. She also knew the children would die if she complied. That night, she sat alone in her quarters while her comms remained silent. No one came to speak to her. No one dared. She was radioactive, a human gone rogue, an Earth-born soldier whose firmware had clearly malfunctioned. She drank black coffee, didn't sleep, didn't apologize. The next day, she was pulled from active duty. Her weapons and credentials were revoked. She was reassigned to await disciplinary review. A simple cabin. Sterile, silent. No guards, just surveillance. A polite imprisonment before the verdict arrived. But someone leaked the footage. The moment her voice rang out, alien viewers recoiled. Not at her words, but the certainty behind them. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't unsure. She said no like someone who had the right to. For species raised on submission, that was terrifying. Across the stars, analysts tried to explain it. Human sociologists on syndicate panels offered calm interpretations. One called it moral self-determination. Another described it as neurological sovereignty failure. Some called it instinctive insubordination, something humans did under pressure. But the footage kept spreading. The audience kept growing. She became a viral anomaly, the death worlder who denied a lawful order. Comment sections turned into war zones. Some demanded her execution. Others called her a living example of why humans were dangerous. But a few voices, often anonymous, whispered the unthinkable. What if she was right? The syndicate issued a statement calling her behavior culturally inconsistent with peacekeeping expectations. Earth's response was brief. Sergeant Voss acted under moral protocol. No action will be taken. That caused more shock than the refusal itself. The humans weren't angry, weren't apologizing, weren't disavowing her. The message was clear. She didn't disobey. She represented them. Syndicate boards convened emergency meetings. Human diplomats were summoned. They came, dressed in civilian attire, speaking in neutral tones. When asked if they endorsed her behavior, they responded with a shrug. She's a grown woman. One said, "You gave her the data. She made a call." The concept was alien. Authority was supposed to mean control. The idea that someone could wear a uniform, receive a lawful directive, and simply decline to comply. It was impossible to process. Except humans did it all the time. Back in her cabin, Elira waited. No trial. No guards. Just silence. She didn't try to explain herself. She wasn't trying to be a symbol. She just didn't want to kill children to meet a metric. She expected exile. Possibly worse. But then, one by one, the messages started coming in. A Zarnan medic wrote, "I didn't think anyone was allowed to say no." A Techri student asked, "How do humans learn to resist?" A Qual naval officer sent a single word, respect. Her inbox grew. Quiet, encrypted support. No declarations. Just acknowledgments. A spark in dry grass. High command shifted tactics. They needed to neutralize her without making her a martyr. They initiated psychological evaluation. She passed. No sign of delusion, instability, or coercion. "Do you regret your decision?" the evaluator asked. "No, even though the consequences may be severe." "Yes." "Yes, you regret it?" "No." "Yes, I accept the consequences." The AI compiling her case couldn't compute her answers without contradictions. They reclassified her as a diplomatic liability, barred from field assignments, restricted to human consulates only. She was no longer a soldier. She was a problem, and the syndicate wasn't equipped to handle problems without levers. Meanwhile, the ripple effects grew. Human officers in other sectors began submitting discretionary holds on fire directives. Entire squads initiated discussion periods before operations. This wasn't open defiance. It was worse. It was a culture of conscience, spreading like a virus. Protocols collapsed not from disobedience, but from thought. Alien commanders tried to reassert control, but the humans weren't refusing orders blindly. They were analyzing them, weighing them, deciding. That scared the syndicate more than rebellion ever could. Elira Voss was summoned to a hearing. No jury, just observation. She stood alone, flanked by 3 judges from species that couldn't pronounce her name. They accused her of tactical abandonment, operational failure, insubordination, and moral arrogance. Her reply was short. "I followed orders until they became immoral. Then I stopped." No defense attorney. No witness. Just one voice. Calm. Human. Untamed. The verdict was delayed. Uncertainty leaked into the system. Syndicate members began arguing internally. Alien societies watched the trial like it was entertainment. Some saw madness. Others saw something else. Hope. Outside the chambers, a group of alien cadets refused an evacuation order during a drill, citing the Voss precedent. They were disciplined, but not punished. Something was changing. The syndicate expected silence after the verdict was postponed. Instead, it heard questions. Quiet at first, then louder, then constant. Questions that hadn't been asked in centuries. Not about logistics, efficiency, or success rates, but about right and wrong. The first to break protocol was a call ensign on a mining inspection team. When instructed to override a safety warning and force production, she paused. She asked if the humans would do it. Her supervisor dismissed the question, but she didn't. She refused the override. No civilian was harmed, but the project stalled. The story would have ended there if she hadn't cited Elira Voss in her report. Others took notice. A Rest diplomat issued an inquiry to Earth's embassy requesting clarification on moral protocol. The reply was short. Conscience supersedes command in edge case scenarios. That phrase alone became a spark. Moral protocol, not a rebellion. A rationale, one even recognized by their leadership. The syndicate's problem wasn't Elira anymore. It was the idea of her. She hadn't broadcast a manifesto. She hadn't incited anything. But her refusal had become an interpretive blueprint, and worse, an example that couldn't be discredited. Attempt to paint her as unstable failed. She passed every mental scan. She wasn't violent. She wasn't insubordinate by nature. She'd served with distinction across 3 deployments. Her file was clean, her record better than most. That made the situation dangerous. In the past, problem individuals could be labeled as radicals, extremists, fringe cases, but Alira Voss was ordinary in the worst way, which meant anyone could become her. The tribunal assembled again. This time, the gallery was full. Silent spectators from every corner of the Alliance, some in uniform, some in robes, some too alien to recognize expression. But every eye locked on her as she stood without ceremony, hands behind her back, chin level. The lead arbiter, a triune mind named Soreket, asked her the same question again. Do you understand what you've done? Alira's reply came without pause. Yes, I set an example. She wasn't trying to be dramatic. She wasn't performing. She simply refused to pretend the world hadn't changed. The arbiter's next question was colder. Do you think others should follow it? She didn't answer right away. Then she said, I think they already are. That was the tipping point. The hearing was adjourned without conclusion. The footage spread. Again, this time, the syndicate's own channels were the source. Leaks within their communications branch, masked as system errors. In every broadcast, her tone was steady, her body still. No theatrics, no deflection, just ownership. The fallout began in minor systems. On Veltraxis, a group of military engineers submitted a unanimous protest against being ordered to dismantle a clean water facility for a fuel expansion. They refused a directive, citing ethical clause, human codex. The term wasn't recognized in syndicate law, but it was recognized by the people. Elsewhere, a cargo navigator aboard the Sarah's Dawn stopped her ship mid-route after identifying forced labor signs at the delivery station. Her captain ordered her to proceed. She declined, not loudly, not with threats. She just said, I won't participate. These weren't humans. They were Draylans. Tekri, Rovii, all species the Syndicate had categorized as behaviorally compliant, and yet they were beginning to act human, not violently, just decisively. Inside military academies, alien cadets began forming unofficial ethics circles, discussing orders and whether they aligned with the Voss standard. These circles were outlawed, but each time one was disbanded, another appeared. Smaller, quieter, but sharper. In one case, a professor asked a Tekri student why he admired a disobedient soldier. The student responded, She reminded us that we're not just tools. The professor wrote a report. That report was leaked. At first, Earth's leadership said nothing. They held no rallies, issued no speeches. No human official stepped forward to defend or condemn the events. When pressed, the Terran Diplomatic Council issued a 9-word statement. Our values are not viruses. They are choices. It was enough. Some syndicate members demanded action, sanctions, restrictions on human integration. But others hesitated, because while the humans weren't pushing this movement, they also weren't hiding it. That made it scarier. It wasn't agenda. It was authenticity. Some in high command considered declaring Alira an ideological threat, but the risk was high. Declare her an enemy, and she becomes a martyr. Acquit her, and she becomes precedent. So they chose the middle path, stagnation. They labeled her status, under review pending ethical reevaluation. A term that meant nothing, but it bought them time. They assumed the noise would die down. Attention would fade. It didn't. New directives were introduced to prevent autonomous ethical hesitations. Every unit received a formal reminder. Orders must be followed unless physically impossible or issued by a hostile force. The implication was clear. Conscience didn't count. The humans ignored the directive. Not rudely, not officially. They just didn't update their protocols. On stations where mixed-species crews operated, tensions rose. Human soldiers began requesting permission to question directives in mission briefings. In most cases, the requests were denied. But the questions were still asked, and in time, their allies began asking too. In one case, a Grawl sergeant halted patrol to verify an ID chip from a suspected smuggler who claimed asylum. His commanding officer told him to proceed with detention. He hesitated. He cited uncertainty of moral clarity. That phrase did not exist in his training, but it existed now. The officer reprimanded him. The public praised him, and others followed. Elira watched this unfold from her silent cabin. No screens, no updates, but she felt the shift, the way guards carried themselves, the glances they exchanged, the extra second they took before replying, like the system they serve had begun to fracture, and no one wanted to be the first to fall through. Her handler visited, a quiet Zavari named Priln, polite, efficient, detached. Until this time. You're causing problems, Priln said without accusation. Elira nodded. They want to make an example of you. They already did, she said. You weren't supposed to spread. She smiled. I didn't. Priln didn't respond. Just watched her, then asked something unexpected. Do you think your way is better? No, she said. I think it's harder. Later that week, Priln resigned. The reason filed was empathic dissonance, the first of many. Inside the syndicate itself, the cracks spread wider. Debates erupted in internal channels. Legal definitions of obedience were scrutinized. Historical precedents were re-examined. A motion was submitted to define moral defiance as a protected form of objection under certain conditions. It failed, but the fact that it existed at all was historic. At the edge of neutral space, a humanitarian crisis emerged. A colony of Drell refugees caught in a crossfire between two expansionist factions. The Syndicate approved a tactical withdrawal. Earth deployed unarmed aid shuttles instead. The Syndicate filed a violation. Earth filed a statement. We do not abandon the vulnerable. She never returned to Earth. The judgment arrived in silence. No announcement, no audience. A plain data slate slid under the door, stamped with the seal of final arbitration. The message was 4 words long. Guilty. Sentenced. No appeal. No guards came. No restraints. No grand procession. Just a notification of outcome. Termination scheduled at cycle's end. It wasn't justice. It wasn't law. It was a quiet elimination of a variable too dangerous to let live. They assumed she would be forgotten, silenced without spectacle, buried without sound. They underestimated the echo. Within hours, news leaked. Not from Earth, not from humans, from inside. A transmission from a junior communications officer in the Syndicate's legal branch. No name attached, just a sentence and timestamp, distributed across hundreds of dark channels. The reaction was immediate and irreversible. The first to act were not humans. They were Krell tacticians on a patrol frigate orbiting the outer fringe. 3 refused a direct order to silence civilian transmissions. When questioned, they cited the precedent of defiant dignity. They used her name without shame. 1 was imprisoned. 2 resigned. All 3 became folk heroes. In a research lab orbiting Learn 6, an alien physicist shut down a weapon calibration system during a field test. The lead engineer threatened to report him. He simply nodded and replied, "Report whatever you need. I'm still not complicit." He walked away. The test never resumed. Aboard a long-haul medical ship, a group of alien doctors formed a formal alliance refusing to assist military triage procedures designed to prioritize elite-class casualties over civilians. Their proposal cited Human Ethical Standpoint Protocol 1. No such protocol existed in official documentation. That didn't matter. The name had already become real. The Syndicate scrambled. Orders were issued to arrest anyone invoking Elira's name in justification for defiance. Dozens were taken. Hundreds more replaced them. The problem wasn't her anymore. It was a framework she had unknowingly authored. It had no logo, no command chain, no flag, just a single global permission slip. Say no. They moved to enforce total information lockdown. Communications were throttled, channels purged, archives restricted. artificial intelligence filters deployed to intercept relevant keywords. That only made the resistance more agile. Terms like Vossian pause, conscience trigger, and Protocol Zero began appearing, none directly linked to her, but all born from her act. In educational hubs, children whispered her name during ethics lessons. In industrial zones, workers began organizing discussion groups labeled Sentient Choice Syndicates. The syndicate panicked and tried to shut them down. The response was unified. We are not part of any rebellion. We are practicing awareness. On Earth, no statements were made. No rallies. No campaigns. Just one quiet update to their public values charter. One new line. When reason fails, refusal must remain an option. It was logged without ceremony, but the galaxy noticed. Pressure built behind closed doors. Internal factions began forming among syndicate leadership. One group demanded immediate restructuring, arguing that suppressing conscience had become unsustainable. Another warned that Earth must be expelled. They are not compatible with control. Neither side won. Instead, paralysis gripped the center. No decisions, no reforms, just more fear. Meanwhile, Alira Voss remained exactly where she had been, silent, unseen, and scheduled for death. The only difference now was the whispers she could feel through the walls. A guard who lingered too long during food drop, a technician who tapped a rhythmic pattern against a metal, a pattern that repeated the syllables of her name. Then the breach. No explosives, no alarms, no dramatic infiltration. Just a door opening and staying open longer than protocol allowed. She stepped out. No one stopped her. No one raised a weapon. She walked calmly past silent personnel, down empty halls, out into a waiting vessel piloted by a species she had never seen before. They didn't speak. They simply nodded once, then jumped to hyperspace. Her escape was denounced by the Syndicate as a terrorist operation. No group claimed responsibility. No government offered shelter. No planet confirmed her presence. But somehow, she was everywhere. Anonymous recordings of her voice, uncertain whether real or fabricated, began circulating. Snippets, statements, none inflammatory, all reflective. If I was wrong, I accept the weight of that. But I won't carry silence for comfort. I didn't say no because I wanted to defy. I said no because someone had to. They thought obedience made systems safe. It only made them brittle. Her words weren't incendiary. They were measured, thoughtful, heavy, and they resonated. Entire units across neutral sectors began filing conscience-based exemptions. The term hadn't existed. Now it overwhelmed administrative queues. The Syndicate labeled it a coordinated campaign of disruption. They called it psychological warfare. Earth denied involvement. Their only reply, we gave them the ability to choose. That's all. A tectonic shift began, not with riots, not with coups, but with hesitation. Orders issued with precision were now met with deliberation. Execution plans paused mid-step. Commanders began having to explain why, not just what. The hierarchy buckled under the weight of scrutiny, not rebellion, not resistance, just reasoning. In one pivotal moment, a tribunal judge, once assigned to Lyra's case, resigned live during a policy debate. His final statement was simple. When my thoughts require permission, they are no longer mine. The galaxy didn't erupt. It shifted. Quietly, relentlessly. Alira Voss remained unseen. No photos, no confirmations, only shadows and stories. A merchant claimed to have seen her sharing tea with a blind widow on Coral 5. A miner swore she saved his crew from a reactor breach before vanishing. A war orphan said she gave him her coat during a snowstorm on a drifting station. None of these were confirmed. All were believed. She became myth not through elevation, but through consistency. No weapons, no armies, just one moment of refusal that refused to die. The Syndicate held on longer than most expected. Centuries of control don't collapse overnight, but the foundation had cracked. And once belief faltered, enforcement became erosion. Civilian populations began electing independent ethical review boards. Syndicate efforts to disband them only strengthened support. Eventually, entire systems opted out of mandatory compliance doctrines. Not violently. They simply stopped listening. One by one, species revised their education, added units on conscious compliance, rewrote old doctrines, removed phrases like unquestioned loyalty, replaced them with measured conviction. Quiet revolutions in classrooms, not battlefields. The final collapse came not from attack, but from fatigue. The syndicate could no longer guarantee obedience without overwhelming force, and it had never been built for persuasion. Elira's legacy was not carved into monuments. It lived in questions, in hesitations, in the half-second pause before sentient being decided whether an order deserved to be followed. She never returned to Earth. Her file remained classified, her fate unconfirmed. Some say she still walks neutral worlds, teaching without words, leading without command,